Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, an atmospheric river has arrived on the south coast, and some rainfall warnings are in effect. What is the risk for flooding? Will this help with drought? Our climate and weather specialist, Darius Madavi, will be here, and we're taking your calls, asking for your questions and how the rain is impacting your community and your commute. After 12:30, a group of UBC earthquake engineers visited Turkey earlier this year, following the devastation of that 7.8 magnitude earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria in February. They're taking your questions about seismic safety. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. We'll find out more about those rainfall warnings and how they're impacting drought levels and flood risk in BC as well in just a moment with Darius Madavi. We're also asking how the rain is affecting your community, your commute today. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And if you have any questions for Darius, do give us a call as well. Now, one of the places under rainfall warning is Squamish, and CBC reporter Yasmin Gandam joins us now from there live. Hello, Yasmin.
Good afternoon, Michelle. As you mentioned, we're under rainfall warning, and you can see it here in Squamish.
We sure can. You're thankfully under a big red umbrella there, but I can certainly hear the rain behind you, Yasmin, and it looks like you're near a creek as well.
Yes, so we are at Eagle Run here in Squamish, and actually this trail would have extended a lot more behind me here, but as you can see, it's filling up with water already, and we're only at noon, and this is expected to just keep getting worse throughout the day into the evening as well.
Wow, I mean, it looks like it's essentially a lake behind you there.
Oh yeah, and you can see there's like pieces of driftwood and debris, floating through the water.
It's moving quite fast as well, eh?
It's moving quite fast. We've got heavy winds, heavy rainfall. It is definitely difficult to stay dry out here.
Yeah. In light of that, what are you hearing from officials or any spokespersons there in Squamish?
So we are going to be chatting with the Squamish Chamber of Commerce later on this afternoon. I spoke to him this morning, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, and he said that at this point they're not too concerned. They feel like things are going to be okay in terms of flood management here. They're not concerned about a possible flood, but of course it is still too early to tell. This rainfall is supposed to continue throughout the week.
Okay. And what have you heard then about that flood risk in Squamish? Perhaps let's backtrack a little bit.
Yeah, there is concerns right now, Michelle. I mean, last year, Squamish saw a huge flood where there were local businesses, even homes that were absolutely submerged. That was the combination of the king tide and the storm surge that really led to the city being blanketed by floods. So, of course, this brings up some of that concern for people in this community.
Yeah. We'll certainly watch to see what you hear more when it comes to flood preparations there when you speak to more folks this afternoon, Yasmin. And I know that, there are always concerns about traveling up the Sea to Sky Highway when we have heavy rainfall. What was the drive like for you from Vancouver?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. Commute is always a concern given heavy rainfall. I mean, it was definitely very damp. There were large puddles up the Sea to Sky Highway and lots of fog as well. So visibility was not great, traveling along the highway. And I expect it's just going to get worse throughout the day as the rainfall progresses.
Okay, well, I appreciate your standing there pretty close to the water's edge. Be safe. Thanks so much, Yasmin.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yasmin Gandam joining us live from Squamish. It's about 10 minutes past the hour now here on BC Today. We are taking your calls as well. Let us know what you're seeing out there. How is the rain affecting your community today? There are rainfall warnings in effect in parts of BC's coast. Flood risk as well. There are heavy winds. Let us know how the weather is affecting you. And if you have any questions about what we can expect over the coming weeks, you can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me now here in studio is Darius Madavi, CBC's climate and weather specialist. We are thankfully quite dry in here. No umbrellas needed, Darius. But yeah, do tell us about the kind of rainfall that we are expecting.
So we had a warning issued by Environment Canada for rainfall on Monday afternoon, evening, warning about rainfall that was coming yesterday until supposed to be tonight, but some of those warnings might get extended into tomorrow, just tomorrow morning, because we might continue to see some rain until then, but that's sort of up in the air. The atmospheric river that's bringing us this rain, as you mentioned, is making it difficult to tell exactly where we're going to get the most rain and exactly how much is going to get dropped, just because of the sheer amount of moisture that's coming. But when Environment Canada first issued the warning, they warned of up to 200 millimeters for the west coast of the island, which seems very plausible at this point. Yesterday, we saw as much as 90 millimeters, or maybe even 100, dumped on some parts of the island. The highest amount that we saw recorded at a weather station was only 50 millimeters. But if you look at the Environment Canada's radar analysis and taking into account the weather station summaries, means that in some places we were likely to have seen up to 100 millimeters of rain. The inland parts of the island also expected to get quite a lot, up to 120 millimeters, and the east coast up to 60, which is quite unusual for the area because it's in the rain shadow of the island. So it doesn't usually get quite as much rain as the rest of the island.
Okay, and as you say, with that atmospheric river, it's hard to predict where exactly that heavy rainfall might be. What about on the mainland?
So new warnings were actually issued just yesterday for parts of the lower mainland and up the central coast because of the rainfall that we're expecting to see. Now, here we're expecting anywhere from 40 to 80 millimeters, quite a range, but again, because it's uncertain, it's hard to say exactly where that moisture is going to land. But as usual, you can expect that the North Shore will probably get much more than other parts of Vancouver. And as you head east into the Fraser Valley, probably a bit less. But many rainfall warnings in place, including for up to Whistler and all up the sea to sky.
Yeah, as we can see there from Yasmin speaking with us from Squamish. So when I hear you say, heavy rainfall on Vancouver Island, I go back to late this summer when we were talking about the drought levels really impacting Vancouver Island, as with other parts of BC as well. Can you tell us how do we connect the two? How will this rain affect drought conditions?
It is hard to say. So we were in drought level 5 across the south coast for months on end, which is extremely significant, very unusual. Looking back over the last few years, we haven't seen anything like that. If you go back further, it's harder to access it's measured differently, but it's a historical drought situation.
Yes.
We need to be keeping an eye on that as well. We have dropped over the last couple of weeks down to drought level 3, finally, after again, months.
Months, yeah.
It is difficult to say what impacts of the drought are lingering without getting out on the ground, but you'd expect that even though we've dropped to drought level 3, a lot of those impacts of level 5 are still remaining, meaning the ground won't be soaking up the water as well as it would in a normal year this time of year. So we could expect to see more runoff, especially for areas that have burn scars from the fires, a lot of areas that don't have as good drainage. So probably this is a worse year than most to get this amount of rain dumped in this short a time. Probably not looking at the same impacts we saw in 2021, but this is a moderate to strong atmospheric river. So certainly we could be looking at some impact. So make sure that if you have just sort of drainage in front of your house, make sure there's no leaves clogging that so that the water can run off as much as possible. And just keep an eye, be safe on the roads for sure.
And I'm glad you brought up, that comparison to 2021. I think anytime people in BC hear the term atmospheric river, they think back to 2021. And what does constitute an atmospheric river then?
So It's really just a long line of moisture. In this case, it's coming up from the subtropics. It's actually driven by a super typhoon that was off the coast of Asia last week. So we're talking half a world away. We're feeling those impacts of that typhoon here.
Wow.
It drew that moisture up from the tropics. It got caught in the jet stream, and now it's being brought to us here. So over the next few days, expect to see, starting yesterday and into as late as Friday morning, expect to see that rain continue for Vancouver. The worst of it may be coming between yesterday and today. Now, we're seeing a bit of a shift in where it was. So yesterday, most of it was dumped on the west coast of sort of the central part of Vancouver Island. That seems to be moving a little bit further south today. So still the west coast going to get the worst of it on the island, but a slightly different area, which is a little bit better, spreading out that rainfall a little bit. But by no means is this a minor event. It's quite unusual to see something of this magnitude, even though atmospheric rivers aren't too uncommon here. Just imagine as it hits the mountains on the North Shore or on the island, the clouds have to sort of rise, and as they do so, they have to drop some of their moisture in order to rise. So that's why we get the rain shadow on the east coast of Vancouver Island. They see less rain because a lot of it has already been dumped. But depending on where you are, on the west coast of the island, on the North Shore of the Lower Mainland, you can see a lot more rain than other places because it just has to dump all of it.
Yeah, that's a really good way of explaining it. And you touched on as well, we're going to show a live shot of Tofino as well. You're talking about Vancouver Island, the west coast of Vancouver Island. And we have a live shot coming in from Wickaninnishin. You can see that certainly high winds as well, as you would expect from Tofino.
Definitely. And we had wind warnings in place earlier this week for Haida Gwaii. We saw yesterday winds as high as well over actually 100 kilometers per hour in some places. High winds also expected today for Vancouver Island on the west coast, again, as we saw. But that should be tapering off into this evening, and we don't have any wind warnings in place anymore. So slightly good news there because we don't have to expect the storm surge that we might otherwise see.
Okay, Darius Madavi is with me, our climate and weather specialist here at CBC Vancouver. We're asking you to give us a call. Let us know, how is the rain? You know, we haven't had this much rainfall in months, Darius, and so it may be just a little, not unexpected, but perhaps just somewhat new to us once again. How is it affecting your community? There is a flood watch as well for some parts of BC, rainfall warning. So how's it affecting your community, your commute? Let us know about staying safe on the roads. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone and email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. In a couple of minutes, we'll hear from a disability advocate about accessibility issues for people who use wheelchairs when the weather is wet. Keith called us earlier and just wants people to know that there are rocks on the road north of Squamish and super heavy pools of water. Yeah, that certainly is something we heard from Yasmin as well, Keith. And so Keith says that's where the big landslide was after the music festival. Okay, so there are still rocks to be worried about there. Advice for drivers is to suck it up and slow down. Slow down. I think those are words of wisdom. Keith, thank you very much. And so he's in Vancouver, just traveled the sea to sky north of Squamish. So rocks on the road and lots of pooling of water. So do be careful out there. I did see quite a bit of pooling on my commute in this morning too. Again, our number, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And so Darius, speaking of the commute, what are the conditions that this kind of rain, this kind of moisture can create on the roads?
As you'd expect, you need to be extra careful on the roads because of how slippery they are. Make sure that you're leaving as much space in front of the car in front as you can. The best way to drive is to leave as much space in front of the car and between the car in front and behind you as possible. Just statistically, that is the best way to drive. So try and do that. Don't tailgate, of all things.
Yes.
Visibility is not great, but rain, it's going to be coming in waves today. We've got bands of moisture passing over different parts of the south coast. Some of that rain will break into the interior as well, but it should be lighter there, so not as big a concern. But all of a sudden the rain could get extremely heavy throughout today. So just keep in mind that you need to be extra aware as you're driving, that at any moment visibility could drop by an incredible amount. So more than ever, make sure that you're leaving that space.
Especially later in the day when it is dark anyway. And I know that the BC River Forecast Center has been talking as well about watching out for those rivers and streams. What should people be thinking about?
The entire island right now is under a high stream flow advisory just because of the sheer amount of rain and, again, how little of it is going to be absorbed by the soil. We also have a flood watch in place from the sort of southern half of the west coast of the island, which is just sort of the next level up. We need to be additionally careful there. No flood warnings in place across the province right now, but also high stream flow advisories for parts of the Columbias, parts of the Shuswap, and all up parts of the Sunshine Coast and the North Shore Mountains, around Whistler and Squamish. So just because of the sheer amount of rain, we're talking a pretty wide felt impact, or at least the potential for wide felt impact. It's very difficult to say where exactly we might see these floods. So not certain by any means that we will get any, but we need to be very conscious of it, especially right now.
So what can people do to prepare?
I think the best thing to do is, again, make sure that the drains in front of your house are cleared out so that you can make sure that the water runs off. If you can be available at home or be monitoring it in some way to know if you have any floods happening, that's great. Again, on the roads, you need to be extra careful. Prepare extra time for your commute today. You need to make sure that now, especially today, because tomorrow we should ease off at least a little bit after the morning. Make sure that if you have plans that you might be able to move around a bit, that might be a bit flexible, might be a good idea to make sure that you're not driving extremely long distances if you don't have to, because again, it is quite unpredictable where we're going to see that rain. We're seeing some extremely heavy rainfall right now on the island over the last 24 hours, again, the same. And so if you look at the sort of 4-day period starting on Monday and heading into tomorrow night, the amount of rainfall is just incredible. So be prepared for pretty wide felt impacts. You can see here some models predicting well over 200 millimeters for some parts of the island. So even more than this is the wrong map, but this is the next 48 hours, which does not include the last 24 hours where we already saw some incredible rainfall.
Yeah, so, look at that.
Just over the next 24 hours, you can see only 20 millimeters for Tofino now, because again, that atmospheric river has shifted further south. So now it's sort of the more southern part of the west coast of the island that's expecting to get the most rain.
Okay, and then heading over to the south coast. Let's take a call now, and Monica is calling us from Summerland with a question for Darius. Hi, Monica. Welcome to the show. Hi, Monica. Can you hear me? I think we've lost our connection with Monica. My apologies. But she did want to know more about traveling on the road. And there have been rock slides in Summerland. And so does that have an effect on the rocks and land as semi-trucks and larger vehicles are going through? Can that have an impact on the possibility of more slides, I think is what she's referring to.
That is a fantastic question. And so the impact of semi-trucks on road, if you're talking about roads, so let's start here. Talking about roads, semi-trucks, heavy vehicles are really the main thing that wears down the roads themselves. They create potholes.
Right.
The weight of cars is so much less than a semi-truck that they don't have that much of an impact on wearing down roads. So the sheer weight is really what impacts the concrete. And as it does so, it can create some pretty intense vibrations. Now, whether that can drive rock slides is a very different question that I think is very interesting. But I would expect that the main driver is really going to be the rain and the weather that you're seeing in the area. I think it is plausible, but I would need to do some research before I put my foot in my mouth.
Yeah, sure. No, that is a really interesting question. We happen to have a seismologist coming up later, so that may be something I ask him. But also, as you're saying, it's also the road conditions in terms of wearing down of the road that may be the impact from traffic. Jack is calling us as well. I just wanted to let people know he's in Abbotsford. Put your rain jacket on, check your rain gutters, yes, to make sure there's good drainage, and you'll save yourself some problems later. Jack, thanks so much for the call from Abbotsford. We are taking your calls today, asking you how the rain is impacting your own community, perhaps your commute as well today, and what is your advice for staying safe on the road? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And right now, we're going to hear as well about the challenges that the rains can pose, wet weather can pose if you are a wheelchair user. The rain can exacerbate those accessibility issues. And Jocelyn Maffin is the Associate Director of Spinal Cord Injury BC and joins us now. Hi, Jocelyn. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I see that you are indoors, which is very nice, but I'm wondering if the rain has affected your day today.
I am pretty lucky. I work from home in Nanaimo here, but it has been quite wet. We came back from traveling a couple of days ago to a very, very wet island climate, and have been trying to do our best to keep the leaves and sort of tree vegetation from making our sidewalk impassable. So yeah, it's affected us a little bit.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point that you make as well. We're talking about drainage, but also the effect that those leaves can have when you're traveling down the sidewalk. And we heard about the heavy rainfall on the east coast of Vancouver Island for sure. What are the safety issues for people who use wheelchairs in this weather?
Oh, sorry about that. I think some of the biggest ones have to do with grip. People who use manual wheelchairs, they're just using their own two hands to steer and grip their wheels. Most wheelchairs have push handles, push rims, which are metal circles attached to the outsides of our wheels. And they're just made of aluminum or chromoly, and they get extremely slippery in the rain. And so our ability to grip, especially on hills, gets considerably worse. And people who use powered mobility, especially power wheelchairs, they have to cover and protect their control units, and sometimes even the motors and batteries on their power wheelchairs, or it might cause malfunctions and puddles, like accumulations of water that either hide gaps or holes in the pavement, or themselves accumulate leaf detritus and cause people to turn over in really vulnerable places. So rain, we always talk about snow being difficult,
Right.
but rain brings a lot of difficulties as well.
Yes. And so what are the the systemic accessibility issues that need to be addressed?
Well, I'm sure you've covered this already today, because I think it's just a best practice, but clearing those drains to make sure that communities remain reasonably accessible on the roadways. One of the biggest reasons the curb cuts accumulate water is because of backup in nearby drains.
Right.
And that can cause that's a problem that a wheelchair user can't do a ton about, because you really need that curb cut. I think that similar can happen in accessible parking spaces, but systemically, cost is the big influence here. Many wheelchair users are low income and don't have the money to constantly replace gloves for wheeling throughout the year. Some of the best gloves that are waterproof and warm and grippy are fairly expensive. And, one of my colleagues was just telling me earlier that he buys them in bulk on Amazon this time of year, because he just goes through so many pairs and they become not waterproof. And other things like lap covers or long Gore-Tex rain coats, which are really important for all kinds of wheelchair users in this weather, so that rain doesn't accumulate on our laps and make us cold or cause complications. Those aren't cheap. Gore-Tex is not cheap. And
Yeah.
I think especially people on pensions and PWD don't have a ton of money to lay out for that kind of equipment.
Okay. So whatever can be done to alleviate those concerns before they become, they add to the cost.
Certainly. And I think people with disabilities in general and wheelchair users in particular are extremely innovative, and they MacGyver their way through all kinds of different issues. There are wheel covers available, there are lap covers, and we have whole articles on our website about different types of gloves that work in different situations. And I think problem solving is just a part of living with a disability, but it would be great to see a bit more money available for people on limited incomes to cover the very real and regular costs of living in our climate. And, this climate is pretty hard on a disabled body, I got to tell you. So just factoring some of those unseen costs into those financial supports.
Jocelyn, really good to speak with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Jocelyn Maffin is Associate Director of Spinal Cord Injury, BC. And Darius Madavi is here with us, our weather and climate specialist at CBC Vancouver. What can we expect in the coming days, and how long would this rain last?
It looks like here, at least on the lower mainland, tomorrow should be the last of it. Friday, it looks like we're clearing up. Now, Environment Canada has forecasted a chance that we see showers return. I think it's less likely, and they've been bringing that in and out. So actually it might be dropped now. But over the last few days, they've been very uncertain, which is very reasonable because the models have been sort of all over the place. I think that by the weekend, for sure, we should have at least a dry day or two, Friday and Saturday. Sunday, we might have another system rolling in, but really the worst of it will be today. And that's the case across the South Coast. Some of those showers may break into the interior. So if you're dry right now in Kamloops or Kelowna, that may not last. It may not. It's very difficult to say exactly where we're going to see that rain make it in. But yes, once we get through today and maybe tomorrow morning, that seems like we're through the worst of it.
A lot of watching right now.
Yes, definitely.
Darius, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Darius Madavi is our climate and weather specialist here at CBC Vancouver. It's 12:32, 1:32 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. And coming up in our next half hour, a group of UBC engineers who went to Turkey to witness the aftermath of that devastating earthquake are sharing their lessons learned. And so we'll hear from one of them, and he'll take your calls and your questions about seismic safety. That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Lytton residents are gathering in the center of their village this hour to demand improved efforts to get them back into homes. Demonstrators who say they have waited more than 2 years to begin rebuilding. Lytton Mayor Denise O'Connor says residents understand archaeology is important, but they believe the village has become an archaeology project, not a rebuild project, and they feel their ancestors would want them to be home by now. And an out-of-service ferry has been brought back online to help ease pressure on the Swartz Bay to Wasson ferry route this afternoon. The Spirit of Vancouver Island was expected back in service tomorrow. For most of the day, all departures from Swartz Bay have been sold out for vehicle traffic until 9 o'clock tonight. And now taking a look at the forecast, rainfall warnings are in place for sections of Vancouver Island, Howe Sound and Whistler. On the north coast, a chance of showers this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 13. Highs to 15 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sun and cloud with a high of 16 degrees. Highs to 15 with sunshine in some areas of the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, cloudy this afternoon with a high of 16. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, lots of rain this afternoon with highs to 15. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1. We're at 88.1 FM in Metro Vancouver, live streaming too. You can use the CBC Gem app, catch us on cbc.ca/BC, or on YouTube. Just search for CBC Vancouver. In world news, the U.S. president is visiting the Middle East today. Joe Biden arrives amid outrage and competing accusations over that huge deadly explosion at a Gaza City hospital. Hundreds of people, including many children, were killed. Hamas blames Israel, but Israel and now Joe Biden say the blame lies with the Islamic Jihad militant group. And Biden says Washington's support of Israel in this war will not waver.
Later this week, I'm going to ask the United States Congress for an unprecedented support package for Israel's defense. We're going to keep Iron Dome fully supplied so it can continue standing sentinel over Israeli skies, saving Israeli lives. We've moved U.S. military assets to the region, including positioning the USS Ford Carrier Strike Group in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the USS Eisenhower on the way to defer further aggression against Israel and to prevent this conflict from spreading.
Biden also announced $100 million in aid for Gaza and the West Bank. The U.S. president met with first responders and families of victims of the Hamas attack on October 7th that set off this war. Daylight pictures showed the destruction at the hospital site. The Hamas-controlled health ministry says 471 people were killed and 314 others were wounded. Mansour Schumann is a Canadian who is living in Gaza. He told the CBC's Artie Poll today that the humanitarian crisis is getting worse.
It's been one of the deadliest days today, full of bombings and shellings all around us. Today, I saw in front of me 3 rows of at least 36 different bodies for elderly women and children who were killed during these strikes. Ambulances come back and forth nonstop. There were 3 strikes around 200 meters in the vicinity of this hospital as well. My family, my wife and 5 kids, all Canadian citizens as well, have evacuated to Khan Yunis. We've moved already 4 times over the last 11 days. They are staying away with friends, and I haven't seen them for the last 3 to 4 days.
I wanted to ask you how they're doing. We're looking at beautiful images of your family. I'm wondering how your children and your partners are doing. Together with like 2.5 million other civilians here, they are going through a very, very rough time, both mentally and physically. Mentally, because of the unpredictability of the situation, because they saw white phosphorus being thrown at us directly by the Israeli force on the first day of the war. Mentally, because the mosque which we used to go to and attend for the last 1.5 years was bombed to the ground right in front of our sites. Mentally, because they saw live images and of buildings in our neighborhood shambled to the grounds, and us trying to help people get out of the rumble. Physically, because right now we are running out of food rations, water supply has been cut, we have electricity very rare, just because we have some electrical generators running on fuel, which we are running out of as well. The situation here is extremely, extremely poor when it comes to humanitarian situation. And everyone here is wondering, including my children. Everyone here, including my children, are wondering, where is the Canadian government? Where are the free world? Where are the people who always talk about human rights and human values? In Canada, we are supporting teaching children to choose their gender, their LGBTQ or not. However, Canadians are not able to choose whether to live or die outside Canadian soil, and we are not allowing aid, which has been outside for 12 days at the borders, to come in and serve the population inside. Where are the human rights that we are talking about?
Mansour Schumann is a Canadian who is living in Gaza. He was speaking to the CBC's Artie Poll, and you'll find more coverage of this story here on CBC Radio 1, on our website, cbcnews.ca, or on your CBC News app. It's 12:39, 1:39 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Thanks so much for joining us. Back in February, Turkey and Syria were struck by a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake. It's considered one of the deadliest in this century. More than 50,000 people died. Now, the earthquake was also felt in Jordan, Israel, and Egypt. Now, in June, earthquake engineers from here at UBC visited some of the hard-hit regions to analyze the impacts of the earthquake and glean lessons for Canada. We're going to be joined by one of them to take your calls. What are your questions about the aftermath of that February earthquake in Turkey? And what are your questions about earthquake building safety here in BC? How can we prepare being in an earthquake zone? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Tony Yang, a professor of civil engineering at UBC and one of the scientists who traveled to Turkey. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Why did you want to go to Turkey?
Well, this is one of the most devastating earthquake events in the century. And as a researchers at UBC, this is something that we wanted to see how the buildings behave during the earthquake, the infrastructures, and how the cities recover after this kind of big earthquake event.
Can you tell us what your first impressions were as you arrived? This was in June, so a few months after.
That's correct. We purposely go there just a few months after the earthquake because right after the earthquake, the focus will be on rescue. And right after the rescue, we decided to go in as a team to observe how the structure behaved during the earthquake. My impression, it's a very devastating event. 11 major city centers was completely destroyed by this earthquake. Over 14 million people are affected by this earthquake. Over 2.5 million buildings were affected by this earthquake. So as someone who's doing earthquake engineering, it's really important for us to show up and understand what they have done well and what they have not done well.
Yeah. What did the buildings look like, those communities?
Well, many of the older buildings collapsed and have caused a lot of death. And by the time we reached there, the poorly performed building has already been demolished. But there are still many buildings which are still standing, but in poor condition, which service what we call the life safety standard, where people can get out, life are safe, but the building need to be replaced. And this is something that we give us lessons that having a building which is not useful after an earthquake may not be so useful for us to design the building for.
You know, I remember speaking with a guest here, a Turkish Canadian who had lost family members in the earthquake. Her grief was just so heartbreaking, and I remember one of her final words in our interview were "Don't forget about us. Don't forget about us here." Once the headlines change, and so I'm thinking of that as I speak with you today. And so, given that you're saying some buildings are gone or buildings are still standing but are in poor shape, what was it like for people, for residents?
Well, it's very devastating. Many people lose their house and lose their family, and they lose the immediate life support they have. But the Turkish government proactively trying to providing shelter, food, and waters for the Turkish peoples during this disaster.
Yeah. Did you meet anyone who still stands out in your memory?
Oh, absolutely. We are really touched. And despite this horrible event, the people in Turkey are still very welcoming for the Canadian colleagues to show up. We met with many locals and trying to understand how they went through this disaster.
Yeah. And so what were the main lessons that you took away?
There are many things we learned. Obviously, our earthquake is very real. This is some of the biggest natural disaster will be faced by mankind. Magnitude like that can completely destroy a city which took hundreds of years to build. And we bring the lessons back here is that the peoples in Turkey are very resilient. They see major earthquake every 10 to 20 years, and the people understand about it. Fortunately and unfortunately in Vancouver, we don't have a major earthquake happen here recently, so people don't know about it. Our colleagues in Turkey knows about it, so by the earthquake when it happened, they know what to do. And the shelter will be ready. People need to know which direction they need to go for help. And for example, the school will be functional right after the earthquake, and the teacher will change their duty and start serving. And those are things that we're really glad to see.
I'll ask you about that in a moment, that you say we don't have that recent experience, so it kind of stays in the back of people's minds,
That's
right?
right.
Let me give out the phone numbers once again. We are asking you to give us a call if you have any questions about lessons learned in the aftermath of the earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria. Our guest visited Turkey in the months after. What are your questions about earthquake preparedness and about our buildings and infrastructure here in BC? What do you think is needed to improve seismic safety? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, you can reach us, bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Tony Yang, professor of civil engineering at UBC. And, Tony, tomorrow is the great shakeout in BC. And it's when, people think about earthquake preparedness and, practice their response. But you're right, it's something we don't necessarily think about. It remains in the back of our minds. How does that affect our own preparedness?
Well, from what I've seen from this earthquake on my trip to Turkey, the Turkish have 2 earthquake drills every year. So they are well prepared to understand what will happen and what to do. The purpose of tomorrow's earthquake day is trying to raise awareness. Earthquake is going to happen in our town, unfortunately. It's not if, it's when. So we need to be fully prepared when the event happened, what kind of immediate resources we need, and how do you communicate it with your family, and where you need to start heading. And we also wanted the government is also very proactively trying to make sure we're minimizing the disaster casualty rate over here. So,
what are your biggest concerns when it comes to our infrastructure here?
Infrastructure? Mm-hmm. We have very rigid building code over here, so I expect that our building will not have that many collapse. Of course, the new building. The old buildings, of course, they were designed in the older code, so we need to retrofit them to ensure they don't collapse. But my biggest concern is that our building code in Canada focus on the life safety of the people. So in the event of an earthquake, we expected a well-designed building will be severely damaged, but people can get out. But after this earthquake I see in Turkey, having a building which is still standing but not useful need to be demolished will cause a lot of financial losses. Yeah, and we need to make sure we need to start thinking beyond the earthquake. After the earthquake, making sure the water is still running, electricity is still okay, and we can start using it. One of the things I'm particularly proud of our colleagues in Turkey, they really pay strong attention about the performance of building after the earthquake. They want to make sure the hospital are still operational, so they are not afraid of using novel technology such as base isolation technology, which you put in the building to ensure the building and the equipment and the patients are safe right after the earthquake.
Hold on, can you just back up a little bit, because that's really interesting. What does it mean to have a building be useful in the days following?
The question is, what does it take?
Yes, what does it take, and what is this technology that you're talking about?
Oh, okay. Technology are fully available now. One of the technology I mentioned is base isolation technology.
What is that?
This is a mature technology. We have already used it in many parts of the world. The idea behind here is that we will put our building on sort of mechanical wheel, if you put it, like the chair is in the wheel. So when the ground moves, your building do not see the shaking. So we have already successfully applied this technology to the Museum of Anthropology here at UBC, and our center block in Ottawa is start using this technology to protect the valuable content and people inside. This is just one of the technology, but there are many other technologies such as dampers, things like you put like your shock absorber in the car, we put in the building, so in the event of earthquake, it would dissipate the earthquake energy and protect the building. So our colleagues in Turkey are very proactively ensuring the building with high performance, so they started using novel technology like that.
And so your concern is that the building code has not taken into account the days following that first the first moments when an earthquake strikes?
Our building code is providing the minimum standard requirement. So the minimum standard requirement is ensuring people can get out of the building. But I think in the future, and we will improve our building code, which I'm one with the community member who writing it, will focus on the performance or the functionality of the building right after earthquake.
Okay, let's take a call asking you to pose your questions to our guest, civil engineering professor Tony Yang at UBC, visited Turkey in June to see the aftermath and how Turkey was doing following that massive, devastating earthquake on February 6th. So you can let us know what your questions are and how you feel about our earthquake preparations and how our infrastructure might do in the face of an earthquake. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Michael is calling us from North Vancouver. Hi, Michael. Thanks so much for calling. What's your question for Tony? Hi, Michael. Can you hear me? Okay, I think we've lost our connection with Michael. Let's go on to Jessica in Victoria. What's your question for Professor Yang, Jessica? I think we might be having some technical issues with our phone calls. I do apologize for that. I think we were facing that in our first half hour as well. Michael wanted to know, we do have some notes from when they called in to our studio, and Michael would like to know from North Van, if there was a big earthquake, would we lose those bridges, and what kinds of preparations have officials taken?
I'm not a government official, but our bridges and building codes are designed to ensure the bridges should not collapse, right? So it will allow us to transfer the goods across to start getting the rescue.
Okay, but some bridges are quite old. Like, are you talking about newer bridges?
Newer bridges.
Like, okay.
Course, yeah.
All right. So if we're thinking about, Lionsgate Bridge.
So for older bridges, the government has been proactively trying to retrofit them to a better standard.
Okay.
But the standard, of course, in the old days was not designed to the rigid requirement at the moment. So you see many retrofit going on in many of the bridges. Yeah.
Okay, and that's ongoing?
That's right. Yeah.
Ongoing work. What are the concerns when it comes to bridges?
Concern to the bridges. Of course, we want to make sure the bridges are fully functional after an earthquake. Then that's the only way that we can get the resources around
Right.
to get the rescue, get the people out, get the resources in.
But in terms of the structure itself, how does an earthquake affect a bridge?
I'm not clear about the question.
When the earth is shaking, what impact does that have on a bridge?
We expect that the bridge will be shaking, no different than the buildings.
Sure.
The difference between the building and the bridges is that the bridges are longer, so different part of the bridges may shake differently, while the buildings are all shaking with the one uniform excitation.
Okay, so certainly it would be important to have that. Would the kind of retrofitting work that we're seeing now, would that minimize that kind of shaking that you're talking about?
Absolutely, and just to be clear, the bridges engineers are putting novel devices in the bridges to ensure they can damp out the earthquake energy and make sure they perform well. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And our other caller on the line was Jessica, who's asking, you're talking about the wheels that are being put under buildings. She's asking, should you get your house bolted to the foundation?
Very good. Most people will expect it if you want to withstand the building for bigger earthquake growth, the right thing to do is bolt your foundation, put a bigger wall. But the idea behind earthquake is an inertial force, which is mass times acceleration. When you make your foundation very strong and the wall very beefy, your acceleration will increase, so you attract more earthquake load. By putting a soft layer of wheels, then the earthquake will go beyond that, so our earthquake demand will reduce. So this is a novel technology, has already been used in many parts of the world: Japan, China, Taiwan, Europe.
How accessible is it for the public?
The technology is fully available, and we wrote it into the National Building Code of Canada, so regular owners are able to start using it. There are thousands of buildings, individual buildings in Japan. They are using this technology to protect their own house.
Okay, and you would speak to a contractor about that? How would you go about trying to access that?
Well, usually this technology are used on new buildings. So during the design phase of the building, the owners can tell the designers that we would like to ensure the building will perform well and using this technology, and our engineers are well equipped in using this technology for that.
Okay. Let's try another caller who's on the line now. Marie is joining us from Burnaby. Hi, Marie. Can you hear me? No, it looks like the line is certainly not working. I do apologize for technical issues here, but Marie's suggestion is that there should be signs all over Vancouver to let them know that there is risk of earthquake, that we are in an earthquake zone. How aware do you think the public is about that?
Again, I'm not sure how aware the publics are knowing about it, but I do know Vancouver is in a high seismic zone. Just to let you know about the location we are. Vancouver, if you go south, we have California. If you go south, we have Mexico, Chile. And if you turn around, we have New Zealand, Indonesia, Taiwan, Japan, Alaska. This is the Pacific Ring of Fire, the most seismic active region in the whole entire Earth.
Yeah.
So we could have magnitude 9 earthquake happen in this region.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is why it's so important to talk about this.
Absolutely.
And as devastating that was absolutely for Turkey, it's why you were there to see what are some things that we can learn in another earthquake zone.
That's right.
And so you've been talking a lot about new technology that can be implemented in new buildings. I'm sure there are people listening right now saying, well, I'm in an older building, I'm in an old apartment, an older home. What can I do? What can those folks do?
Absolutely. We do have technology to improving the performance of older buildings, where we call the retrofit schemes. So many engineers are already doing it. In particular, our Ministry of Education have funded a project to upgrade all the middle school and high schools in the BC area to ensure they actually will have higher performance after an earthquake. And older building can be retrofitted to withstand better load and having lower risk of damage.
What should they focus on?
In terms of the
homeowners, residents in older apartment buildings, what are some things they should push for?
Well, first of all, I'm very glad you invited us here to, first of all, have awareness, right? To understand earthquake is real and it will happen to our town. So we must do everything we can to prepare for this unavoidable. So, and as a building owners, if you live in the apartments or in the buildings, one thing first is probably have the homeowner association have a discussion to do an evaluation of their own building on their own, and then find out what's the deficiency. And having a structural engineer, there are many firms in town, they can provide a service to help them to check what's good and what's deficient about that, and they can provide solution for them, and they could have understanding what they can do to improve it.
Okay, look into it and raise that awareness. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Michelle.
Good
Bye-bye.
to have you with us. Tony Yang, Professor of Civil Engineering at UBC. That's it for our show today. Thanks so much to everyone. I know lots of you tried to call in. I apologize we couldn't connect with you on the show, but I do appreciate your joining us. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a good afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow.